Why is there a cut in this masonry wall? Students who are learning the art of construction management, those who want to be the tradesmen, these are the type of videos you should be watching to learn your way through project. There's another one here, another one here, another one here, and another one here. All right, so let's go to the drawings. So I come to the drawings and you see what it says, masonry control joint, MCJ. And it will point to this point right here, that line cut in it. There's also one here, MCJ. Make our way across. Another one with a jog in the wall. One's there, one's there. Another one here. And lastly, that last one was right here. Okay, so a masonry control joint in the standard setting is a joint which is intentionally created to allow movement, expansion, and contraction of two separate areas, meaning one side to the other side. That joint separates those two areas. But in this situation, I really believe they meant expansion joint. So I pulled it up on Google and I wanted to explain something to you. A control joint is a vertical mortar joint in a masonry that prevents shrinkage-related cracking. Now, that sounds great, but if you start to head down this way, difference from expansion joints. Control joints prevent cracking, while expansion joints prevent cracking caused by expansion and contraction. Most of the time, architects tend to switch those over from an expansion joint to a control joint, not realizing that sometimes that the expansion joint is designed to accommodate larger thermal movements. So in your case, or our case, a thermal movement would be due to fluctuations in hot and cold. Now up north, they usually put those in, and this building was designed for the north. So it could be minus 5 degrees all the way up to a warm, blistering 90 degrees. So that fluctuation can be huge. If that's the case, that would be more an expansion joint. But like I said, it can be used interchangeably with a masonry control joint as an expansion joint and or. So in this case, I believe they're calling it a masonry control joint, but it really is an expansion joint. Now, I didn't show you, but it does show in there that that expansion joint is to be caulked. So that leans even more so towards an expansion joint, not so much a masonry control joint. I mean, if you stayed this long for this video, kudos to you. At least you figured something out, right?
NASA just discovered a parallel universe next to ours that runs backwards in time. What the did you just say to me? Yeah, so they discovered it in Antarctica, and they have an antenna that scans cosmic particles. And they discovered that they're running backwards in this specific place. What the heck are cosmic particles? Cosmic particles usually travel downwards from space, like they come down, but these were coming up from the Earth. These cosmic particles were coming up from the Earth. So basically that is completely against all physics that we know of. Dr. Gorham from the University of Hawaii is the main researcher, and he said that he theorizes that these particles are just transforming to bypass Earth's dense matter. Okay, I don't understand science, so you gotta explain it to me differently than that. Basically, there's something very different about this area of Antarctica, and they don't know what it is, but the particles are definitely reacting in a way that are completely opposing what we know about modern physics, and they're trying to figure it out because they're witnessing it happening over and over again. Okay, but does he know how this would have happened? His most straightforward explanation theory is that when the Big Bang happened, it created two universes where one is opposite of ours, and everyone in the anti-universe might think that we are the ones that are in reverse. So there could be like a totally other civilization living our life backwards. Are we there? At this point it's still a theory because they can't say for sure that there's a multiverse. However, they don't know what else it is. This is one of the possibilities. I mean, that's true. We don't really know that much, so there could be another explanation that we just don't know yet.
In our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens. I believe that what this verse means is that he gave us dominion to rule over the fish, and that the angels were designed to work in our favor and help us out. We see this theme throughout the Bible too. This is exactly why Jesus is able to walk on water. This is why he helps people walk on water. When you take his hand and focus on him, you can walk on water too. In Revelation 21, it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." This is because God removed hell. He removed all evil. That's what they're telling you when they say the sea was no more. It also makes me wonder about Moses parting the Red Sea, if this was just physically parting it, or if it was only in the spiritual sense, or if it was multiple meanings. When you look at things from this perspective, it really makes your understanding of things whoa. I think this is why a lot of us just have a natural fear of the ocean. And when you look through other ancient texts, a lot of times sailors are also dealing with demonic entities, or they are considered to be bad themselves. So I'm wondering if that's symbolic of what they're trying to tell us. In some cases, they might actually be sailors, but they might also be dealing with demonic. I feel like salt water has to do with the Nephilim. So a lot of people know about the theory about Himalayan salt being sleeping giants or whatever, and I'm wondering if that's what that is. If that's why our oceans have salt water, because hell is down there. But the saltiest part of the ocean on Earth is the Red Sea, and the other one is in Antarctica. I mean, think about it. We can technically drink from springs and lakes and fresh water like rain, but salt water is toxic to humans, even though water itself is necessary for our bodies. I also feel like there might be some kind of connection to the fact that we technically call boats vessels, and they're riding on the ocean, which I think is hell. And demons, when they're trying to get back to Earth, they're always looking for a vessel, like a human. I also think it's interesting that Catholic holy water is made by taking regular water, adding salt, and doing incantations over it. Let me know what you guys think. If you have anything to add to this, please comment below. I'm really interested in this topic and would love to group think about it to figure more out about it. This is for entertainment purposes only, and I'm completely crazy. Don't listen to a word I say.
Take a look at this.
There is a huge difference between angels in Islam and Christianity, and that difference is free will. You see, Islam and Christianity are both considered Abrahamic religions. They do share a lot in common. And so both religions speak of angels. Angels in Islam were created from light with the sole purpose of obeying God. In fact, they are incapable of committing sins as they have no free will. In Christianity, angels are capable of sinning. In fact, many that have disobeyed the will of God have been banished from the heavens and are referred to as fallen angels. Which brings us to another very big difference. The devil in Christianity is understood to be a fallen angel. He's referred to as Lucifer. Now, but in Islam, the devil or shaitan is actually a jinn. And I'll discuss what a jinn is very soon.
Okay, so when Jesus curses the fig tree, there's two things that we're supposed to learn from it. However, without context, it's really difficult to understand the message, so here's the context that you've been missing. So scripture tells us that when this event happens, Jesus was on his way back to this city. My question for you is, what city was he going to? Earlier in Matthew chapter 21, we learned that the city refers to Jerusalem. And this ultimately sets up the scene for Jesus entering the city on the back of a camel, as was prophesied. As we learned from scripture, the night before he was in Bethany. The reason this is important is because, as you can see, from Bethany all the way to Jerusalem is a small town called Bethphage. Bethphage was considered to be a part of Jerusalem, but it was exclusively reserved for the religious leaders and Jewish authorities. Due to its significance, Bethphage was symbolic of the posture of the spiritual condition of Israel. Kind of the way DC represents the political capital of America, or like the Silicon Valley represents the tech capital of America. Now, funny enough, when you translate the name Bethphage, it actually means house of unripe figs, and this sets the narrative for the rest of the story. You see, all throughout scripture, the fig tree has always been symbolic for the nation of Israel. My favorite example is Hosea chapter 9, verse 10. God says, "When I found Israel, it was like finding grapes in the desert. When I saw your ancestors, it was like seeing the early fruit on the fig tree." Another example is Jeremiah 24. The Lord asked Jeremiah, "What do you see?" And Jeremiah sees a basket of 2 figs, one that can be eaten and one that cannot be eaten. God tells him that the good figs that can be eaten are those who obey the Lord, and the bad figs that cannot are those who disobeyed him. But the point I'm trying to make is that the fig tree has always been symbolic of Israel throughout scripture. And if you want to find additional references, just do a Google search, but you'll find this in like Hosea, Zechariah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Psalms. The second bit of relevant information to understand is that the way that the fig tree blooms is like this. The fruit blooms first, and then the leaves come second. Notice how they're both the same color. So from a distance, when you see leaves on a fig tree, the expectation is that you would also see the fruit. Okay, so knowing all that, let's look at this again in context. Jesus goes to sleep in Bethany. The next morning, he wakes up and he goes to Jerusalem. As he's on the way to Jerusalem, he sees a fig tree and he goes up to eat, but there's nothing on the fig tree except leaves. We just learned that Jesus would have been most likely somewhere in this area, which is considered Jerusalem, but technically Bethphage. And he sees a tree that looks like this and he expects to find fruit, but he doesn't. Seeing the deception of this tree, he then says this prophetical word. He says, "May you never bear fruit again." What does this all mean? Well, it's very simple. You see, the tree would have been symbolic of Israel's spiritual condition. On the outside, it looked like everything was okay, but upon closer inspection, it was clear it was not. Remember, the very previous day when Jesus was in Jerusalem, he goes into the temple courts and he sees that people are buying and selling goods in his Father's house. The fig tree being cursed was Jesus' prophetical utterance saying that I can see through the leaves and I can see through and see what's truly on the inside of you. It was also supposed to be a warning to any modern day believer who claims to be a believer but they don't have fruits upon further inspection. A fruitful fig tree was always symbolic of a blessing. Meanwhile, a barren fig tree would have been symbolic of judgment. So the cursed fig tree represented the spiritual barrenness of Israel due to their religious leaders at the time. Remember, Bethphage literally means house of unripe figs. I mean, imagine the irony of using this as your identity and then Jesus then cursing the thing that you identify with. The cursing of the fig tree also has a second meaning also. The meaning once again ratifies Jesus' power and authority to execute judgments upon the nation of Israel and believers who are barren. You might be familiar with this parable in Luke chapter 13, verse 6 to 9. It says, "A man has a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. The man then tells the owner or the caretaker of the vineyard that I've been coming to look for fruit on this tree and I haven't found any, cut it down. The caretaker then responds, leave it alone for one more year, and ultimately says, let's see if it can bear fruit with this extension that we've given it. The fig tree in that parable was the nation of Israel. The man who wanted to cut it down is God, and the caretaker of the fig tree is Jesus. He's literally interceding to God, asking for mercy on the behalf of the Israelites. Let me summarize this by just explaining the principle behind Jesus cursing the fig tree. Religious ceremonies, professions, religious garments, they're not enough to obtain salvation. Instead, the proof of salvation should be fruit that accompanies the external changes of your leaves.
Here comes a powerful way to turn off anger before it poisons your body with cortisol. And it doesn't involve thinking, it actually involves your body. You see, your body has all kinds of ways to control and regulate your emotions and even purge out negative emotions that they simply don't teach in school. There are places you can tap on your body that'll boost your immune system. There are places that you can tap that'll boost your energy level. And there are ways you can turn off negative emotions in the moment. So what is this powerful way to stop anger? You simply block air incoming to your right nostril. That actually turns off and subdues the ego side, and it actually stimulates our calming side, which makes us more calm immediately, almost instantly upon the first breath in. And so if something makes you angry, just, take in a nice inhale and exhale through that left nostril. That's the calming side. If you need more energy or to wake up fast, then block your left nostril and that'll wake you up. And of course, you might not want to look weird suddenly blocking your nose if you're in an argument. So here's a cool move you can do if somebody says something that pisses you off. Simply go, They'll just think you're thinking, not realizing you've actually closed down that reactionary side. And you'll probably come back with some beautiful, calm wisdom that will save the day. And I'm sharing beautiful tips like this and many more over in my 21-day celebration and challenge over at Club Qigong to kick off the new year right. Why not give yourself something to get inspired about this new year while becoming your higher self through fun, effortless techniques like this one? Simply click the link in my bio or head over to clubqigong.com and scroll down to the courses area where you'll see the 21-day wellness celebration and challenge. Of course, it's more of a celebration because the best way to get fit is to have fun doing it. That makes it sustainable.
I've seen this all over the internet. People putting rubber bands around their ears to depuff their face and snatch their jawline. What exactly is going on? So this is a Korean skincare hack where people are tying a rubber band on their ear to, I guess they're trying to sort of enhance lymphatic drainage. Now, our lymph nodes are mainly on our neck in this area. And so you want to, if your lymph nodes are clogged, yes, it can cause more puffing of your skin and more like bogginess in your jawline. So by improving the lymphatic drainage, conceivably you could improve your neckline, you could have less puffiness, but why are you putting it on your ear? Your ear doesn't really have lymphatic drainage. It's not going to get clogged. This is not the bottleneck. This is not the traffic jam that causes lymphatic buildup. I think a much better idea in these instances is to do things that can help to depuff your face. If I have people who wake up in the morning that are much more puffy, I know that that happens to me. If you eat a lot, like a really salty meal, or you're bloated, get up a little earlier, wake up, get more vertical, because that's going to help enhance drainage of your face and depuff you. A diuretic, if you can use that safely, can help too, just like less water in your body. Be careful with that though. Ice packs, so many other things, gua sha even, or like a cold jade roller or ice packs can help to depuff your face. And I don't think that it's important to do this to your ear. And in fact, I hate when I sleep with my ear bent because I just wake up with a headache. So that can cause more problems than it's worth.
If you've been told to stay away from salt because you have high blood pressure, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you've been duped. I remember my aunt struggling with it for decades, always measuring it multiple times a day, eating super bland food, and for some reason always avoiding soups. That's what she's been told. What have you been told? Let me know in the comments. And while you do that, I'll let you know what actually causes your high blood pressure. This is going to blow your mind. It's not the salt. It's insulin resistance. Here are 3 reasons why insulin resistance increases your blood pressure. Number 1, when you have insulin resistance, your kidneys retain the salt. This is what increases the volume of fluid in your bloodstream, increasing your blood pressure. Number 2 is that insulin resistance puts your body into a fight or flight mode by activating your sympathetic nervous system. This narrows your blood vessels. And when they constrict, guess what goes up? Your blood pressure. Number 3 is that insulin resistance makes your arteries stiff. It damages the lining of your blood vessels, which prevents them from dilating properly. This causes them to expand and constrict with more rigidity, which requires more of a force to pump your blood, making your heart work harder and thereby increasing your blood pressure. So it's not the salt, it's the sugars, the processed carbohydrates, the constant snacking. If you start working on reversing your insulin resistance, you can get rid of all of those medications within a matter of months.
4 foods that can improve your gut health according to research, and the last 2 I eat every single day. First one is one of my all-time favorites and has been shown in research studies to be as effective as psyllium husk and prunes to improve the symptoms of bloating and constipation. It's the humble kiwi. Kiwi is particularly rich in soluble fiber, which promotes softer stool and increases stool frequency without the associated side effects of some laxatives. Number 2 is something that a lot of people consume already but aren't aware of its gut health benefits. Coffee. Coffee has been consistently linked with a reduced risk of fatty liver disease and the development of liver cirrhosis and chronic liver disease. Coffee contains the double whammy of soluble fibers and polyphenols act as prebiotics to feed your good gut bacteria. Coffee may also improve gut motility, making it beneficial for reducing constipation. And for you coffee snobs out there, instant coffee and decaf have these same benefits. Number 3 is something I try to eat every single day: mixed nuts like almonds, walnuts and pistachios. Having a mixture of nuts gives you a diverse range of prebiotic fibers which promote microbial diversity in your gut. There are studies suggesting that regular nut consumption, around 20 to 30 grams a day, is associated with a reduction in colorectal cancer risk, possibly by reducing inflammation and improving microbial diversity. Number 4 is something I have every single day and it's loved by every GI surgeon, doctor or dietitian: yogurt. Look for yogurt containing live active cultures like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, which can help to add to your good microbial load. Yogurt's been shown to alleviate symptoms of IBS and can even improve lactose digestion in those who are lactose intolerant.
Citric acid, black mold.
Citric acid, black mold. Citric acid, black mold.
What up, y'all? It's Kim Thug, and today we talk about the active ingredient in citrus fruit. That's right, talking about citric acid, which way more interesting of a molecule than I ever expected it to be. So for one, it was discovered twice, which to me, that's just like fascinating. It's that whole lost knowledge thing. It's also central to virtually all life, like all oxygen dependent life uses citric acid in some way, which to me is also one of those things where I'm like, that's wild. If we wanted to cover the 2.7 million tons of it we made in 2023, we would need 50 billion extra lemons. And that's part of why for the last 100 years or so, we've been making it from mold. The same way that we make like alcohol and acetic acid, vinegar from a fungus, but we're going to talk about it. First though, I want to talk about how it was initially discovered, because that to me is kind of cool. This Persian alchemist by the name of Jabir ibn Hayyan isolated a substance whose properties track to what we know now to be citric acid. Side note, this guy Jabir also discovered hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, tartaric acid, and a few other chemical techniques discovered, developed, perfected. He's a very interesting character. Definitely gonna get his own video. I digress. The substance he was able to describe the properties of matches up with what we know of as citric acid today. But at the time, we just didn't really know enough about chemistry as like a hard science. As I said, he was an alchemist. So the information about citric acid just kind of ended up not getting used for almost an exact 1,000 years. Because in 1794, the German-Swedish chemist Carl Wilhelm Scheele was able to also isolate citric acid from lemon juice, but he did so in a pure form. At this point, we kind of knew a little bit more about chemistry. We had a better understanding of, well, I can take a molecule and turn it into something else. So once the chemist had like the active ingredient of citrus fruit, you know, the essence of lemon, it was like, well, what can we do with it? And more importantly, how do we get more of it? So the first part, what can we do with it, is rather fascinating. Citric acid as a molecule kind of looks like if you took 2 acetic acid molecules, a methanol molecule, and a formic acid molecule, and just have all of them hold hands in the middle. And because it's got these 3 different acid parts on it, it's what's called a tricarboxylic acid. Having 3 of those makes it pretty strong. It's about 100 times stronger than vinegar as far as acids go, but it's still safe to eat. So while it's very good at doing most of the things that vinegar can do in terms of cleaning and cooking, it's kind of got its own special uses as well. One of the really special things about citric acid is, again, the fact that it's got 3 of those carboxylic acids on it. Because those 3 groups, if they all lose their proton, well, all 3 of them can attach to metal ions. And if you get 2 citrate molecules, they'll both attach to a metal ion, and then that metal ion can't do anything else. And this is called chelation. And this chelating property, this ability to sequester metals and make them not do chemistry, is a big part of what citric acid even got used for early on. So with all of these uses and more, like it gets used in dyes as a mordant, it gets used in metalworking because it can passivate the surfaces of metals, which is a process where you make a coating on the metal so that it doesn't react with things as much. A good example of this is aluminum foil, which aluminum foil is way more reactive than you think. Maybe I'll make a little video about it. But citric acid is a very useful molecule, incredibly useful in terms of the things that can be done with it. And so the next thing that chemists wanted to do was figure out, well, how can we make it? And unfortunately, making it in the lab, not a vibe. The best synthesis that was developed for citric acid was developed by this gentleman, Louis Grimau, and his colleague Adams, whose first name I can't find. But their synthesis starts from glycerol, the stuff you get when you saponify soap, and requires potassium dichromate and cyanide in 2 steps. You don't want none of that near anything you're going to eat. No. So it was really great that in 1893, Karl Weimer, a German chemist and mycologist, because this was still the time when scientists were just scientists. So, he's a chemist, but he's also working with fungi. Fortunately, he was a chemist and working with fungi and figured out while working with this fungi, hey, this fungi is making a lot more citric acid than I feel like it's supposed to. I wonder if I can use this fungi to make citric acid in large quantities. And it turns out he was right. So a few years later, he managed to get a patent for doing this on an industrial scale. And it kind of failed. And the Italian citrus fruit industry rejoiced for another few years because up until that point, that was where all the citric acid came from. But Weimer's method while in principle made sense, didn't work that well, mostly because they couldn't get a pure product. The citric acid was too contaminated to use. So that idea got scrapped for maybe about 20 years until John Curie, a food chemist in the US, was like, wait, what if I use Aspergillus niger though? Yes, this is one of the ones, the black mold thing. We're going to get to it. So 1915 kind of marked the start of us brewing one of our newest industrial chemical products, citric acid. Making citric acid from Aspergillus niger has been something we've been doing for over 100 years at this point. And we've been really refining this process that whole time. What's really fascinating to me, though, is part of why you can make citric acid from Aspergillus niger, because it's not the only one you can make it from. Remember, Waymer figured out making it from the penicillin mold, which I think is still the same one that we use to make actual penicillin. But it's in part because citric acid occurs not just in citrus fruit, but in you too, and your dog, and your mom, and everybody else you know, and everything you know. Citric acid is central to this thing called the citric acid cycle, which is the same thing as the Krebs cycle. What? Which, if you didn't know, and I'm not a biochemist, so I'm going to skim through this a little bit. When you eat food, your body has to break that food down into stuff to make energy out of that food. The cycle in your body that turns your food into energy is the Krebs cycle. The citric acid cycle is responsible for you having any energy to watch this video right now. That blows my mind. Like, what? Why? It has a lot to do with the chemistry of the citric acid molecule, and that's a lot to get into in this video, so I will spare you that one, but perhaps let me know in the comments if you want like a deep dive on the Krebs cycle. In some ways, this is part of why and how we're able to use a microorganism to make citric acid. You can kind of hack their metabolism, and if you feed them a specific broth of ingredients, then they're going to overproduce citric acid, and then you can just collect the citric acid. There are a couple different ways that the setup for brewing citric acid works, but generally speaking, you take a solution of, we'll call them waste sugars, just like sugary liquids, molasses, corn syrup. That's not good for people. People aren't going to eat this stuff. And you mix it with the mold, and the mold is usually like kind of just in the solution, and you kind of just agitate it and you let it go and you let it cook for a little while. But eventually, the Aspergillus niger mold will turn that sugar solution that you gave it into citric acid and some other things, but mostly citric acid. Kind of the same way that, you know, yeast turns sugar into beer, and how a mother of vinegar turns ethanol into acetic acid. So the mold does the same thing. Once you have all this citric acid created from the sugar you gave it, though, you got to get it out. So the first thing they do is, well, you know, you filter out the mold because you don't want the mold. You got this liquid now that doesn't have the mold in it anymore. And what they do with this liquid, which is full of citric acid and other things, is they add this stuff called calcium hydroxide, or lime, to the mixture. If you garden, you're probably familiar with calcium hydroxide. It's often used as a base to raise the pH of your soil. And here it acts as a base to react with the citric acid, specifically all three of those carboxylic acids on it. It pops those protons off, and the calcium hydroxide turns into water and just free calcium ions. The citric acid, having been deprotonated, becomes a citrate anion, and it pairs up with the calcium. And now you've got calcium citrate, and that does not dissolve in water. Calcium hydroxide will, and so does citric acid. But because the calcium citrate doesn't dissolve, once you mix these two things together, it just kind of falls out of solution. It's almost magical, actually. It's like you mix two clear solutions and you just get sand. But this sand is relatively pure calcium citrate. So now that you got your kind of calcium citrate powder here, you got to clean it up a little bit more. So they effectively put it in a washing machine because this powder doesn't dissolve in water, but anything that's like mixed in with it probably does. And once you've got pure calcium citrate, now it's time for the next step. You take that powder and you mix it with this magical substance called sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is a wild chemical. Like, it is so important to humanity. It is kind of ridiculous how important sulfuric acid is to humanity. Definitely going to get its own video. One of the things that most people know about sulfuric acid, though, is that it's a very aggressive, angry, powerful acid. And not a lot of things are going to do a good job of surviving once exposed to it. Granted, they probably don't use purely concentrated sulfuric acid. I do believe it's dilute sulfuric acid, but still, once you got your washed calcium citrate and you add that sulfuric acid to it, you get another acid-base reaction. And this time, the calcium citrate reacts and turns back into citric acid, and the calcium and the sulfate from the sulfuric acid pair up to make calcium sulfate, which that isn't soluble in water, so that just falls out. But the citric acid you just made is soluble in water, so that stays there. Incidentally, that calcium sulfate stuff is effectively the same stuff that's in drywall. It's like gypsum. So it's very not water soluble. So you just kind of filter it out the same way you'd like filter, coffee grinds. And you're left with a liquid that's very concentrated in citric acid. So now how do you get the citric acid out? There are a couple ways. Usually they recrystallize the citric acid out. And if you want to know about recrystallization, you should check out my video on recrystallization, specifically the one about the borax skull. I did a good job on that video. It's a very good explanation. Go check it out. Long story short, most things, when you dissolve them in a liquid, in this case, citric acid and water, there's like a limit to how much you can get into that amount of water that you have. And you can increase that limit by heating the water up, but you also decrease the limit if you cool the water down, right? Because one thing has to be true, then the other thing has to be true, right? So once you've got this solution of citric acid, after reacting it with the sulfuric acid and filtering out the calcium sulfate, what they can do is just try to dry up the water and just get the citric acid by itself. Because if you have less water, you can't dissolve as much citric acid. So it just starts to literally just come out as a solid. The other thing you can do is cool this water down. Same principle, where as you're cooling it down, the water can't hold on to as much citric acid anymore. So citric acid starts to just kind of group and clump together in the solution. And this is where the crystals come from. In order to do this, each of those citric acid molecules kind of have to come together and hold hands in the right orientation. And if they can't, then they don't form a crystal. But more importantly, if something else tries to get in there and form the crystal, it won't work either. It has to be the citric acid molecule or whatever else you're recrystallizing. Recrystallization is itself a process of purifying things, and this is how they get pure citric acid after the fact. At the end of this process, you end up with pure crystals of that sticky, icky, ooey gooey citric acid good stuff. This pure citric acid that you get at the end of this process should be pretty much good for more or less any purpose, asterisk. Because we do have to talk a little bit about the fact that some people feel some type of way about the fact that we make it from a fungus. Some people might not like the fact that I said fungus instead of mold. It's a kind of an important distinction. Not all funguses form molds. Probably most molds are funguses, but not all funguses form molds. And to call it a mold is not really meaningfully useful or helpful, I think, in that discussion. The other important thing to understand is that Aspergillus niger, the fungus used to make citric acid, isn't the same as Stachybotrys, which is the commonly thought of bad black mold. And we don't use that one to make citric acid. But Aspergillus niger is one of those molds that's like literally everywhere. I don't care how clean you think your house is. There is Aspergillus niger in your house, and it's okay. It's more or less fine. I am not the only one who's ever gotten an onion out of the cabinet and been like, yo, there's a little bit of black stuff on it. I'm just gonna rinse this off. For the vast majority of people, that fungus does not cause any form of adverse reaction. And we have 100 years of making citric acid in this way to kind of show that the vast majority of people are not negatively impacted by citric acid that's made in this fashion. However, it is understood there is a small percentage of the strains of Aspergillus niger that are capable of producing a mycotoxin called ochratoxin A. Now, I said all of that, and I know somebody's freaking out. It is not that kind of harmful. It is mostly a problem for specific people who have a specific sensitivity to it. I'm not going to sit here and say that maybe it wouldn't be nice to get a label on things that say this citric acid was made via Aspergillus niger, but the reality is almost all of our citric acid is made from Aspergillus niger. That said, however, the overwhelming majority of evidence dictates that it is not a problem for people. That isn't to say that people aren't looking into better ways to make sure that more people are not impacted by any slight adverse effect from, poor purification. And there is a lot to be said about the actual manufacturer and what processes they follow versus the idealized situation. But at the end of the day, like, unless they're giving you that broth from the beginning, it really shouldn't be that bad. Although that broth in the beginning, I cut that part off the onion. I'm not trying to say, eat fungus. Like, don't do that. But yeah, citric acid, yet another one of those wonderful commodity chemicals that we can brew. And boy, do we brew a lot of it, because there are just too many things that it's good for. I didn't even get into the fact that a lot of supplements are made as citrate supplements because, well, as I mentioned, it's kind of part of that whole Krebs cycle thing. So, if there's anything that's going to be safe for your body, it's probably citric acid. Yeah, it's just a dope little molecule. It really is. And I'm glad I made this video, and I'm glad you watched to the end. And I thank you so very, very much for your attention and your time.
Lots of chemistry and interesting stuff at the end there. Yo, my friend, how has everything been to this point? I hope you have been well. I've been Y311H. As we wrap up today's episode, my friend, let's give thanks. I'm searching for this one's brother and sister, and it's like they are missing in action. Let's continue without them. Let me share with you first from the Book of Wisdom. And our word of today at this time is talking about there's some words that Jesus was telling some guys there about their sight. So listen carefully. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, what? Are we blind too? Jesus said, if you are blind, you will not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Interesting. That is from John 9:38 going down. Our Creator gives us sight, light, and all the good things. Let's give thanks to Him. Thank you, wonderful Father. Thank you for this far. Thank you for your goodness and today's video. Thank you for the word that we've heard from the Book of Wisdom. Dear Lord Father, open our eyes, Father, so we may see your deeds and your blessings in our lives. Help us, Father, to walk in your path and do not go astray. Forgive us all our sins together with your child here, Father, and make us clean. May your blessings and love, Father, be in our lives. In your holy name, King of Kings, we do pray, trusting and believing. Amen. Next time, my friend, till next time, good vibes be with you. Toodles!